one of the things that I think in terms of sort of treading the path least trodden is climbing the highest peak in Iraq
Hmm.
in 2018, which is not something that you can eventually hear people talking about as much. It's obviously not as popular as climbing the highest peak in Africa, let's say, as that is
Hmm.
a path quite well trodden at this point,
Yeah.
and you're going there very soon. But what was it about that expedition that you focused on? What were the lessons you learned along the way that has essentially given you the expertise that you now have?
Good question. I mean, so that was a few years into the career, as it were. But climbing the highest mountain in Iraq was, yeah, that was kind of a big one in many respects. It was a bold idea, and to add a bit of context here, at the time I was doing a lot of work guiding people through the likes of Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Congo, really kind of testing the limits of what is possible, where it's possible to travel to, and working with people from all kinds of really interesting backgrounds. And I got together with a couple of colleagues at the time, and we wanted to set up something really, really bold. And I had this brainwave. Well, I knew I was going to Iraq, and so just doing a bit of research, heard about the highest mountain in the country, and thought, you know what, that sounds like a proper adventure. And it's located up on the Iranian border, very sensitive part of the country. The mountain itself is surrounded by landmines, which were left in the 80s by Saddam Hussein. It is very hard to get to. You need to go through a lot of checkpoints to get there. And, as far as my research told me, only a tiny number of outsiders had actually ever been to this mountain. And it's a 3,600-meter mountain. We wanted to climb it in winter. It is full winter conditions, sort of think brutal Scottish winter conditions. So it was really pushing the limits. And then, you factor in actually taking a group out there, making sure they're safe, thinking about all the safety considerations. The margins are pretty thin. So when I did that, and I did have quite a bit of experience at this point, I knew that I could not take any chances when it came to the level of risk. So I went out there on my own 2018, found myself local, good, really solid local contact. Turned out to be probably the most experienced mountain guide in Iraq. Linked up with him, stayed in his house. We spent a few days on the mountain, recce'd the route, dodged the minefields, made it to the summit. Happy days. And then it was a case of actually rolling it out and putting it to the general public and seeing if we could put a small expedition together. Did people have the appetite for something like this that was really at the limits of what is sort of available on the market in terms of adventurous experiences? And believe it or not, we got a small team together, a small team of international trekkers, and flew out there the following year to go and climb the mountain. And it turned out to be a really interesting process, and certainly from a leadership point of view, probably one of the most interesting moments that I've experienced, when it comes to decision making in particular. And we were on this mountain, and I knew the mountain well. I'd studied it, learned everything I knew about the mountain. I recce'd it the year before, knew the routes, knew the dangers, and so there we are, 3 days into the, 4 days into the trek. We've been camping our way up the mountain, hauling all of our supplies. I mean, there's no porters, no assistance whatsoever, so each person was carrying sort of 15, 20 kilo packs. We had our local guide. I was doing the navigating, and then we were parked at the final camp before the summit. And I talk about this because I think this is an important story to share. And I knew that the last ascent up to the summit was 500-meter snow slope, essentially surrounded by cliffs on either side, and it is perfect avalanche terrain. It's about 35 degrees. It is sort of yeah, just perfect avalanche terrain in every way. And so for you to climb that mountain or that section of the slope and get to the summit, the snow conditions needed to be absolutely perfect. And what I'd observed in the days building up to it, of course, there's no weather forecast, there's no avalanche forecasts out there, so I was figuring it all out myself. I was digging snow pits in the snow, really trying to understand the snow conditions, explaining it to the team as I went along. And what I found essentially was really worrying. And it was what we had on the surface was what we call rock solid wind slab. So it's wind blown snow, it's rock hard, and underneath that sort of a thin layer of what they call grauple, which is almost like tiny ball bearings. And so essentially you've got, it's like having granite on top of ball bearings. And if you break that granite at a steep angle, you know, you can imagine the consequences. It would be thousands of tons of snow sliding down the mountain. So, um, you know, I just remember this distinct moment when I was lying in my sleeping bag, you know, at 3,000 meters, halfway up the highest mountain in Iraq. I've got a team full of people who've flown here from around the world with this great expectation of reaching the mountaintop. And, you know, for one of the few times in my life, it really felt like I had the lives of those people resting on my shoulders. And, you know, this is the severity of some of these expeditions, and particularly in a leadership capacity. People are entrusting their lives in you. And so, you know, I had to make a decision that next morning, and we set off to go and have a look, as I like to say. And we got to the base of this steep snow slope, dug more avalanche pits. It looked as terrible as ever. And actually, I turned the group around, and you know, we decided not to go for it. I decided that we shouldn't go for it. And so, yeah, that was an interesting process to go through. And I look back at that decision. It's a decision I've thought about a lot. I've talked about it a lot to other mountain guides. And you know, I do believe it's probably one of the best decisions I've ever made. Um, you know, in a place like that, you simply cannot afford to. Yeah, you can't afford to take huge risks with when the safety margins are so slim. The you know, the possibilities of rescue are so slim. You really are out there on your own. And so I did learn a lesson from that. And you know, I think the lesson I learned is from a leadership point of view is actually explaining to people as I was going along, bringing them inside of my decision making process. That was really powerful. So that by the time I made the decision, they knew what that decision was going to be. And by really tapping into the team and, you know, sort of using them throughout that process of climbing the mountain, when I did make that decision and we came back down the mountain, though there was that disappointment, you know, each one of those people made a commitment and a decision to come back and do more expeditions with me in the future.